Welcome to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. Breathe, eat, sleep, thrive in every aspect of your life. What does thriving actually mean? Thriving is not a word, it's an action, a way of living. And that's what the Best Living Show is all about. So get ready, step into a new narrative, and find a new way of being. There's a beautiful connection, a spark that flies at the intersection between the genetic code and your internal guidance system. We're going to throw away the culture that would tell us that thriving is something only for a few. Every one of us is unique. It's our time to discover why. The Best Living Show starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Rachel Sweet, and you're listening to the Best Living Show on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with us for the next hour. You're going to learn all about sleep. Sleep is super foundational to our health, and as women, it is even more important as we age, particularly as we reach menopause. And today I have Kim Connolly with us. She's joining us from down under. And she is really an expert when it comes to menopause. She's a registered dietitian. She's an epigenetic coach. She's also the contributing author to the book Expressive Origins. And along with April Wright, they are the directors of the company Koabella. And their goal at Koabella is to empower women to live their higher purpose by coaching them through health challenges that come from hormonal shifts in menopause. They focus on slowing down biological aging, which, yeah, we all want that, right? So that we can live lives that are full with vitality and freedom that good health brings. Welcome to the show, Kim. How are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me, Rachel. It's wonderful to be here, and I feel very privileged to be able to chat to you today about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is menopause. Why? Because when it hit me, it wasn't very pleasant, and I decided I wanted to know more about that and what I could do about it. And yeah, that led me on this awesome journey. So yeah, very, very happy to be here with you.
That's great. You know, as you said that, I'm like immediately, yes, when menopause hit me, it was like so abrupt because I actually had a surgical menopause. And it was like one day I had estrogen, next day no estrogen. And it was like, for a while, I thought I was losing my mind until I really came to understand what was happening to me, how to work with that, and really then look at my epigenetics as well to see how I could tweak things. And by doing that, I found such relief. So I'm hoping that with you and I over the next hour, we can kind of speak to that, how we kind of overcame some of those challenges that a lot of women, I see them, you know, all over Facebook and Instagram, struggling with this, what is a natural change of life for a woman. And it can be really difficult, as you said, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. And I think, knowledge is power here. And up until perhaps the last 5 years or so, we haven't had a lot of public knowledge about what was going on and why.
Right.
And we certainly didn't understand the full spectrum of symptoms that you can get as your hormones start to shift. And perhaps we should start by saying, well, what actually is menopause? Because you mentioned
Right.
going through surgical menopause, which of
Yes.
course is where the major source of those hormones is removed. When you lose your ovaries, it will be an immediate menopause, because that's where the controlling mechanism is for our hormones, our estrogen and progesterone. And when that is removed immediately, then there's a major change, and it is a very, very traumatic change in the human body when that happens. But for women who go through menopause naturally, and menopause is only defined looking backwards. So it's actually the last menstrual period. That's the pause, and it's plus 12 months. So that's just because, you may have a menstrual period and then 3 or 4 months later, you might get another one. Well, that's in the transition, but it's not menopause until you've had a 12-month period, a 12-month break without a period. So it's the last menstrual period plus 12 months is the age at which you go through menopause.
So you mentioned like you might have a break, and then you might menstruate again and then another break. So that would really be considered perimenopausal.
Yeah, that's right. And that can be anywhere up to a decade before. And so if the average age, and of course no woman is average, but the average time at which women experience menopause is sort of between 51 and 52, then a decade before, that's 41 to 42, and you can
Wow, yeah.
start to experience fluctuations in those hormones then that long out. And women may not recognize that as being perimenopause, but that can be perimenopause. And that can lead to things like, the weight gain that we see that happens around the midriff for women in menopause. But that's when you can start to see and feel these sleep changes as well. So your sleep pattern might start to disrupt a bit. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So
yeah. Yeah. So let's start with kind of perimenopausal, because I remember before I had the hysterectomy that I did wake up a couple of nights just drenched in sweat, like just head to toe, bed wet. Like, what's going on there? Why does that happen?
Yes, the poster child of menopause, the hot flush, or the hot flash, as you guys call it. So, yeah, that's once again, that's a disruption in those hormones, and we think that estrogen has a role in temperature control. And so when your thermostat gets out of whack because something's shifting in the amount of those hormones, the balance of those hormones, and we often talk about health being like this homeostasis. So it's not one point or another, it's being able to your body being able to bring itself back to balance. And so when that balances out, then the thermostat gets affected and goes a bit haywire. So that's that, temperature, lack of temperature control, which of course is one of the things that can really impact sleep, because it will pull you out of sleep. That stress will wake you up.
Yeah. I actually, once I had gone through the hysterectomy, it was almost like an alarm clock went off. I think it was around 5 a.m. And I would just feel like I was going to internally combust, because it was so hot. And I would just throw the covers off and I'd be like, oh, like this. And then, you'd wait for it to subside. And then you're like, it's 5 a.m. Like, I don't need to be up right now, and of course, as you said, this now is disrupting my sleep. So I started to get it before, right, as I was perimenopausal. Then as I ended up having the hysterectomy, it was like every day, and like even throughout the day, you'd just be like this. So, how is that, like, statistically, what's the statistics on how that's affecting women for as far as their sleep?
Yeah, sure. So the hot flash will certainly create a disruption to your sleep, but it's not the only thing that happens in terms of sleep disruptions. So there can be more subtle things that happen. And statistically, there's only about 12% of women before menopause that report sleep problems. But that jumps up to around 40% in perimenopause. And then it can be up to 60% after menopause. So, we talk about the hot flash being disruptive of sleep, but of course they tend to settle down as the hormones stop doing their last tango on your ovaries. And then you get more of a postmenopausal sort of effect, but that can still be a real sleep disruptor because the hormones involved have a role in the sleep cycle as well. So now we are deficient, we no longer have them, and there's a benefit to having those hormones around in terms of how physiologically women operate. And so now those levels are low, and that creates these potentially ongoing disruptions to our bodies moving forward. And sleep is one of those big ones, and I'm sure we'll get into the importance of sleep because it is absolutely critical for longevity and health span. But
we're definitely going to talk about that. So, I mean, there's a couple of different things though, right? Like, so we have trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep. And then, you know, like once maybe a hot flash wakes us up, trouble going back to sleep. And then what does that do like for our system? You talked about like kind of the regulatory system there that the hormones play into, you know, what does that do for us like the next day, for instance, you know?
Well, and I guess most of us have had a poor night's sleep somewhere in our lives. And so we know what it feels like to wake up with that real gritty sensation in your eyes, and your eyes feeling dry, and just feeling over this sense of fatigue that just saturates your whole body. Just every cell of your body just feels weary. Um, and and then just not being able to focus for very long periods of time, easily distracted, find yourself wandering off and daydreaming and not being able to function at work, those sorts of things. But this affects your mood as well. When you haven't had a good night's sleep, you don't have the same energy, so you don't have the same sense of who you are and that exuberance for life, and that just gets drained out of you without sleep. And of course, I'm
Right.
speaking from personal experience here because
Yeah, I think we
it
can
was
all relate
awful.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and then you're hungrier than normal
right,
too, because the brain has a role in sleep, and it's a critical role. And so when you don't get enough sleep, it is fatigued. And what is fatigue? Well, it's a lack of energy to a cell.
right,
And so the brain cells aren't sufficiently energized to do what they do, which is your focus and your creativity and all of those things that we love to have when they're available to us. And so lack of sleep just robs us of that. And the worst thing is that in many situations in menopause, it's out of our control, or it feels out of our control, because it's the hormones driving that. Um,
right.
and I know from my own personal experience when this first started to happen, the shift that I could see in my sleep pattern was happening in my early 40s, and I went through menopause at at the average age of 52. I like to do things um, according to the book. So by 42, 45, I noticed that my sleep wasn't what it was, and it was enough to trigger me to go, hey, that's not how I used to be. And I
Right.
distinctly remember back in my 30s when I'd had a really bad night's sleep, waking up thinking, this is awful. I never want to do that again. And so when we're younger, we don't realize how good sleep is and how great it makes us feel the next day, because we haven't had the absence of it. So we've got nothing to
Right.
compare to. But on those odd occasions, you can remember it. That's what I was remembering when this constant pattern started to change. And I went, oh, this is happening more frequently. I'm
Right.
waking at 2 in the morning, and that's it.
Yeah.
Where's the rest of my sleep? And
Yeah.
and it's not like you want to wake up. It's just that you can't physically wind yourself back down to go
Yeah.
back to
Because
sleep and
with
get
that hot flash, right, isn't there like a certain component of it that is like almost adrenalizing?
Yeah. Well, it's a stress. It's a
Right.
stress on the system. Like, it's a cortisol releasing stress, which is disruptive to melatonin, our sleep hormone, at the best of times. But yeah, there's a role in, nearly turning on fire, which is what it feels like. It just
Right.
feels like you are going to self-combust. It's such a different feeling to just being hot. It's like this internal
Oh yeah.
roasting system is just emanating, and everyone around you can feel it. Like, don't get too close, because you do actually feel hot as well. So yeah, that's certainly going to wake you up and be a stressor. And so we've got these two components to it. We've got the hot flushes, which can wake you out of this beautiful peaceful sleep, and then we've got the issues around just this chronically ongoing trouble, which can either be falling asleep, and you've got to be really cognizant of getting that sleep routine right to enable that. Whereas before, you just used to be able to flop onto bed and that was it, your lights are
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Um, and then waking up in these early hours of the morning and going, gee, I know I'm not quite rested, but you can feel, you just don't have the chemistry there to sleep. And it's a horrible feeling because you know what the day looks like and feels like because
Right.
you've been there
Yeah.
before now. So it is a nasty place to be.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break now. But when we come back, I want to take a deep dive into sleep because we did talk about how important it is and how foundational it is to your health. So we're going to stay tuned. We're going to come back and we're going to take that deep dive. You're listening to the Best Living Show with Dr. Rachel Sweet, and we look forward to taking that dive on sleep when we get back. My guest today is Kim Colony. We are talking all about menopause and the changes in sleep that come along with menopause. Before, we were talking about kind of what menopause means and kind of what time in the life, your life, does that happen. Now we're really going to take a deep dive into sleep and the benefits of sleep and how that changes as we move into menopause. But before we go on with that, I want Kim to give for you to give everybody, how can they contact you, the listeners? What's the best way that they can get in touch with you if they really want to take a deep dive with you on menopause and how they can help themselves through that?
Sure. The easiest way to get in contact with myself and April is via that website that we mentioned. So koabella.com, and that's COABELLA.com. And there's a contact form on there that you can get hold of us, but also what we do with menopause is listed on there too. So it's a great starting point. And then by all means reach out and we'll get back to you through that system.
Great. All right. So we said that sleep was foundational. We said that there was some hormonal changes that happened during menopause. Can you talk about that? Because a lot of people say estrogen, but you also mentioned progesterone, testosterone. There's more than one hormone that's being affected here. And I'm not sure that everybody really understands that. So what does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So when the ovaries stop producing eggs, we lose our estrogen, and then that also affects our progesterone. And interestingly, when that perimenopause transition happens, it tends to be the progesterone in general that declines in more of a steady way, but earlier. And progesterone's got an important role in impacting our GABA, our neurotransmitter for anxiety and relaxation. So, of course, we need to be able to wind down with GABA in order to fall asleep, and to initiate some of those sleep stages. So progesterone's got a role there, and estrogen and testosterone both have a role in sleep as well, because they can impact the quality and duration of sleep. And part of our sleep cycle is, and we'll get into this, is affected by our circadian patterns. And we've got receptors for estrogen and progesterone in the clock that controls our day-wake cycle. So clearly there's this relationship there in terms of the cycling of sleep, because it's not just go to sleep, wake up. We go through different stages of sleep. And so different stages of sleep can be impacted differentially as well. So all three hormones, estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone, have a role in sleep. And interestingly, women who are premenopausal compared to men especially have a much lower rate of sleep disordered breathing. So the sleep apnea diagnosis that men and women can be given. And after menopause, that goes up significantly for women, but only in women who aren't on hormone replacement. So those who are on hormone replacement have a similar risk rate to those premenopausal. So clearly there's a role of these sex hormones in our breathing capacity as well. And some of the thoughts around that are the role of progesterone, which has an effect on tongue. So there's receptors on the tongue and how that's operating. And of course, when the tongue closes over your airways, that's an issue if it becomes too lax. And so it's got a role in that. And it's also got a respiratory stimulation effect as well. So there's some more research to be done in this area, but there's a relationship. And I've seen this in women who are not the typical, risk factors, include being overweight, storing a lot of weight around your neck and things like that. And these are lean women who've ended up with a diagnosis of sleep apnea. And I think, well, why? And now that I've been able to dig into the research a bit, we can see that there's a role for those hormones and those receptors on those particular organs. So it's interesting, and I'm sure we'll see more as there's more money now. And there's more talk in this space around menopause, and so we'll see more research in these areas.
Wow, it's so interesting, because we don't really realize, how much the sex hormones don't just regulate like ovulation and our menses and things like that, but they really do play a role in almost every aspect of our brain, our cognition. It's quite amazing. You just don't realize how far that extends. And as you said, even to our respiratory system.
Well, our eyes, we've got estrogen receptors in our eyes, we've got them on our tongue. I don't think there's a cell that we're aware of that doesn't have a receptor. So, quite profound, the potential symptoms and impact of much lower levels in all of the systems that are in the body. And that's why the menopause symptoms are so diverse. I think there's something like 49 different symptoms. So we think of hot flushes and go, oh, it's menopause, but all these other things that are going on, not the least of which is, being more anxious and feeling stress at a much deeper level than we used to, and wondering what on earth's going on, in that way that you were talking about, Rachel, with your experience, just, thinking you were going crazy.
Oh yeah.
It
Thought I was
really
losing my mind.
it really is that dramatic. And women need to know that there are many things that can be done, but just to know that it's not just them, and that this is very common, and there are things, and women will experience it differently because of their different genetic code, their different, gene weaknesses and strengths as well. So not everyone has a great transition.
I think that was the hardest thing for me, because some of the other women around me were like, oh, menopause, like, and I'm like, yeah, you didn't just have like your everything removed. Like, you don't know what that's like. And of course, like, I'm feeling so flustered and I can't remember anything. And like, I'm just having these moments of panic and, oh my, what do I do? And they're just like, oh, like, chill, it's fine. And I'm like, you do not understand what I'm going through. So I think you're right. Like, we all have these different ways that we deal with that transition, or how our body reacts to that transition. And no two ladies are alike. And we should never, kind of assume or dismiss like anything that they're feeling, because it really could be, as you said, there's a receptor everywhere, really affecting them in a myriad of ways that we wouldn't even know, because we didn't have that ourselves. And so I think that just shines the light on how some women struggle and some don't. But I wanted to get back to this sleep, because we've said how important sleep is, and when we've talked about how this really, as when we went through menopause, disrupted our sleep. And the research shows we need 6.5 to 7.5 hours of sleep. But what happens is, you said 3 o'clock in the morning, hot flash, I'm wide awake. Now I'm anxious. I'm not getting enough sleep. I got to work in the morning. It starts to compound. What else is going on there, as far as like, as it affects our sleep? How is that also playing into that sense of, I'm losing my mind, I'm getting anxious? It's kind of like a snowball there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess just understanding what sleep does for us is so critical to understanding then the flip side, which is when we don't get enough. So and this is why sleep science has grown so much in the last couple of decades, because we've now worked out through our wonderful scientists who've identified that we've got this lymph-based system in the brain which only activates during sleep, and it's called the glymph. And if that doesn't turn on, then it's kind of like the cleaning out of the brain doesn't happen, because we need that relaxation of the brain in order to flush out the toxins that are stored in the cells. And sleep is when we do it, and we do it, in that deep sleep. So we really need not to be kicked out by a hot flush in our deep sleep, because it will kick us out of sleep. And that disrupts the whole cleaning of the brain. And we've got to remove those toxins so that the cells of the brain can operate effectively. So without it, we don't have that sharpness, that focus, that memory recall, that emotional balance, because it's hurting our brain cells, and we're feeling that emotionally. And we don't have that motivation and creativity that comes from great sleep. But there are other things that happen in sleep, like our immune system. We heal when we sleep. And so our immune system is regenerating, making immune cells and the antibodies we need to fight infections, and producing the proteins, etc., that we need to repair our system. Our metabolism is affected by sleep. And of course, metabolism is energy production in the cell, not just how much weight we've got or not got. But it's also when we build muscle. So we go and exercise during the day, but all of those gains are happening through the changes that occur during sleep, or a lot of them are as well. And it's also where our hormones are rebalanced. So, things like ghrelin, our hunger hormone, and leptin, our feeling full or satiety hormone, and insulin, which controls our fat and sugar storage, our glucose storage. They are all balanced when we have good sleep, and we become resistant to aspects of that when we don't get adequate sleep, which is part of that hunger that we experience. It's our body's just trying to compensate for this process not happening.
Right.
Make us insulin resistant, or produce more ghrelin, just to drive up eating, to regenerate some of that lost.
So it kind of cascades into a lot of other things. Well,
and we see
we're gonna take another break.
Yeah,
Hate
okay.
to cut you off.
No.
It's so fascinating. But we're gonna keep going with this, talking about sleep, and then we're gonna talk a little bit about sleep genetics. You talked about the clocks. And I want everybody to know that you're gonna be giving them an offer later on as well, so they'll want to stay tuned for that. All right, so we're gonna take a break. I'm Dr. Rachel Sweet, and you're listening to the Best Living Show. And when we come back, we're gonna dive into some genetics and epigenetics of sleep. Stay tuned. And we're back, and we're on the Best Living Show with Dr. Rachel Sweet. And we have been talking with Kim all about the importance of sleep. We've just been kind of taking like almost a deep dive, but really there's so much information to unpack here. It's almost impossible to cover it all on one show, but we're really trying to give you an idea of what happens during menopause, how that's affecting your sleep. And before the break, we were talking about how it affects metabolism, cleaning the brain out, which is super important for your cognitive ability. And as we age, obviously not getting neurological disorders. And I want to start back there, because it has effect on our heart and our blood pressure, because you mentioned breathing, and breathing is super important to the heart and the respiratory system. So let's start with that and some of the HRV, because I know that goes into the stress component. It all kind of starts with sleep, and then with menopause on top of that, how that all builds to affect those systems.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, our heart is definitely loves good, consistent sleep as well for its recovery. And so your blood pressure and your heart rate go down during different stages of sleep, and then they're higher during the REM sleep, which is that dream state when everything's sort of doing its REM stuff. So so there's a big role of reducing and rebalancing the autonomic nervous system, which is both of those components, so speeding it up and slowing it down. And sleep is really important for that balance as well. And when we wake up, and it doesn't matter which stage of sleep we wake up in, because of a hot flush or something affecting us, and typically it's the hot flush here that will be active, then it can disrupt that balance, and then that raises our sympathetic activation. So heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up when it's meant to be down and rhythmic and slower, which it does during those deeper stages of sleep. So that can then cause this over activation, which reduces our heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is this wonderful tool into the heart and how well it's recovering from the stresses of living. And so for you can track your heart rate variability with different tools. And I use the Oura Ring, which gives me some really good insight into the quality of my sleep, number one, but also then how well my system is recovering overnight. And there are things that can really disrupt that, like, and we'll talk about those, eating late and alcohol, and we'll dive into those a little bit. And you can see that through the mirror of your heart rate variability, which we like it to be higher for you, and it's all relative to you. And when you can see it dipping, you know that something's impacting your recovery, your rest and recovery. Insomnia in women is actually associated with heart disease, and more so for women than men, interestingly. Wow. And this is thought of to be at least in part through the inflammation that drives, and we're a lot more conscious of this chronic low-grade inflammation that contributes to so many chronic medical conditions. Yeah. And so we don't want to add fuel to that fire. And like we said, inflammation is part of the immune response, and we want the immune system to be recovering, and good quality sleep is critical for that. Yeah. So, the heart likes regular, consistent sleep, full stop. Yeah. It's part of this systemic health that we want to try and achieve.
Yeah. As we're talking here, and as we've been talking, it just reminds me that, how complex our systems are, and that, one thing feeds into another. So, we start to have these changes with menopause, and then it kind of disrupts our sleep. And then from there, it can disrupt our breathing. It can disrupt, our cognition. It can disrupt our heart. And it just, all of that, then, as you said, if the whole system is starting to get disrupted, there's that cascade of symptoms that becomes with that is really inflammation, because the body's trying to prop up, right, and fix. And that's kind of its way of coping. And so and then of course we get stressed on top of that, and then stress causes even more inflammation, and it becomes this cycle. So one of the things I want to talk about now is, we kind of talked about, like, all right, here it is, this is what happens. But you and I are epigenetic coaches. We dive into people's genetic blueprints. We look at the epigenetics. And I know for me, once I started to look at mine, I resolved some of my cognitive, kind of that fuzz and that brain fog that you can get. I really started to feel better, because, I think everybody has, as I say, a blueprint, and we can start to live to that blueprint. And that really starts to help everything and start to roll back that cascade. So if we look at sleep, you talked about clocks earlier, and there, we understand there's a chronotype. Explain to people what that means when we talk about clocks and chronotypes for sleep.
Sure. So we can sense the chronotype we are based on whether we are a morning person or a slightly later person. So with our chronotype, which controls our going, the pattern of going to sleep, there is a delayed chronotype, and that person we would refer to as a night owl. So someone who has trouble falling asleep earlier, and they have this delay, which then means that they may quite naturally go to sleep sort of 10 o'clock to midnight, sort of, around that time frame, but also wake later. So still getting the required number of hours sleep if their environment allows that, and our environments aren't very good for our night owls, who are genetically more inclined to have that. Whereas the majority of the population tend to be earlier, so that the normal genetic pattern is to be an earlier riser. So that's the way our world tends to work, is that everything starts earlier in the day, which doesn't really serve our night owls very well. So the thing is, if you sleep against your chronotype, then your brain will get used to the disruption to its sleep, and it will accept that as a new norm. So you may be experiencing, a level of lower energy and fatigue and cognition changes that could be improved just by knowing what your chronotype is and working to try and sleep to that pattern. And getting the benefits of sleeping to the type of genetics you've got at play in terms of your wake sleep cycle.
Right. And so most people, as you say, they have a morning propensity. So they wait somewhere between 4 and 6. I might go to bed around, anywhere from 8 to 10, sometimes maybe a shift a little bit depending on the genetics. And I know, like, a lot of times people try and make up sleep on the weekend, which we know that doesn't work. But what are some of the things that we can do if we're struggling with our sleep cycle? And maybe, like me, 5 o'clock in the morning, I got that hot flash goes off and now I'm awake, but I'm like a person that likes to do 11 to 7, so now I'm waking up 2 hours early. What can I do in that case?
Yeah, well, I think, as you said, first thing is know the pattern, know your propensity, and then you want to eat and sleep to that pattern. So, we don't like to encourage people to eat within about 3 hours of going to bed, because it does disrupt your circadian rhythm. And I guess if we talked a little bit about your circadian rhythm, well, every cell in the body has its own rhythm when it's going to do particular things, and it's going to release hormones, make proteins, etc., according to the rhythm and the cell type it is. And so they all take their cue from this light-dark cycle. And the light-dark cycle takes we get that control mechanism in the brain from the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a set of cells sensitive to light, sunlight, that then sets this is morning, and certainly a number of hours from that is going to be night. And so the rhythm of releasing our sleep hormone melatonin is taken from when sunlight hits that set of cells through the eyes, and that set of cells sets the timer then, and it sets the timer, and every clock which is what these rhythms are based on, every set of genes that is this rhythm takes its cue from that. Now, you can disrupt that monumentally if you try and eat late at night, because the pancreas is going, and the digestive system's going, I've got to release enzymes and insulin and other hormones on cue based on this rhythm, and all of a sudden you've just thrown food in here. Now I've got to get all the workers back in here to start making some more of these hormones and enzymes in order to digest your food. And so you're working against that rhythm. So working to eat and sleep, knowing what your pattern is, and then working to eat and sleep to maintain that. And then that, of course, means setting that clock too. So ideally, within half an hour of waking, getting some sunlight in your eye really helps to show that set of cells that, hey, it's daylight. We should start our countdown now to sleep, which is a certain number of hours. And then that rhythm will be then, as the body anticipates night, melatonin will be released, which is our sleep hormone. And we can really disrupt that, because in our society, where we can firstly be dark in the morning, and that of course depends on which part of the world you're in. So if you can't get up and get sunlight, and by the way, exercise also is a synergy with that. So it really cements in, yes, this is the morning. Welcome to the world. So those two together can be very impactful for setting that clock. But then also, if you're in a part of the world where it's dark and you're up, it's getting some form of blue light. And there are different bulbs in your light bulbs that you can now get to mimic sunlight, so those blue light rich bulbs, which can then still set those clocks. And that affects your mood, because we tend to have a higher mood in the morning as a result of all of that as well. So yeah, so then it comes to the end of the day, and we really don't want to muck with our melatonin, because that's helping us control that sleep rhythm. And interestingly, our melatonin is typically highest at 2 in the morning. And anyone who's having those wake ups, it will probably see 1 or 2 in the morning, because that tends to be where you're waking up and not able to go back to sleep again. So one of the things we want to make sure we're doing is not disrupting our melatonin production, because melatonin is produced in the absence of light. So when you've got that blue light present, then melatonin can't be made. And so you can really disrupt your production of that sleep hormone. And it needs about 3.5 hours of that darkness to get really good levels of melatonin. Of course, this depends on the genes that you have as well, because we've got different gene variants control how much melatonin we're likely to make, how good our receptors are for melatonin, and how quickly we break it down, because it's continuously, being made, being broken down in this rhythmic cycle. And so your genetics can give you a good idea as to whether melatonin is one of the issues that's contributing to the disruption overnight. But lifestyle.
So if you're genetically a fast metabolizer, right? So that way you're going through that melatonin production faster than perhaps somebody else who's not got genetics for that.
Yeah. And so that might account for some of the differences we see in women's sleep pattern going through menopause. But also our melatonin production starts to decline around puberty, as do many things.
Wow.
Every decade we're losing our capacity to produce melatonin. And so by the time we get to 50, that's a long way from puberty. Our potential to produce melatonin is also affected. So we've got your genetics, and if you've got really good genes for making melatonin, it may be less of an issue, but you might have still some reduction in that production just through the aging process. And then you've got your genetics playing a role too. But then you've got environment. So, melatonin is disrupted by blue light. So if you've got overhead lights, which mimic sun to the brain's like, oh, it's still sunny here, we won't make melatonin yet, then you're delaying your sleep onset, because you need that for sleep. So you're pushing back and you're squeezing.
All those devices, right? All the phones, the tablets and things that we have all emit that blue light.
That's right. So at nighttime, and this is one of the habits that I've introduced, is that as soon as it starts to get, around that dusk sort of time, we start to turn the lights off, and we just have those lower lamps on, which, with the warmer light in it. So blue light's quite crisp and white. And so getting the bulbs that aren't that, just to having your lamps, and because you've got then that light below eye height as well, we just don't realize how impactful our world is on our rhythms.
Right.
So having light above you even makes a difference to having it below eye height, which of course mimics the sun going down.
Interesting.
So having those low level lights, those dimmer lights, that really can encourage that melatonin production. And yes, then if you do need to be on your computer or your screen, at least having the blue light filter on it. But that's not the only thing, of course, that will disrupt that, because if you're doing something exciting or something that gets your heart rate up, cortisol, which comes from stress, whether it's a positive or a negative stress,
Right.
also disrupts your melatonin production.
Yeah.
So, binging on one of the channels at night and watching your favorite exciting show is also having an effect on your melatonin production. So,
And
through
also
this
exercising, right? In the evening, you should really like put it to early evening so that that's not stimulating you as well, right?
because that's a positive stress as well. And interestingly, this comes back to your genetics, because some people actually get sleepier with exercise. It's one of those quirks of your genes. And some people, and the majority don't, the majority are woken up by exercise. So just even being aware of how you feel after you exercise. And then if you go, yeah, I certainly am more alert after exercise, right? Well, that's probably not the ideal before bed, but it can be a balance. So exercise can help reduce some of those stresses in our life as well. And so that might actually help you to wind down a bit too. So it's really quite individualized, but being aware of these things, exercise,
Really knowing
melatonin,
thyself, right?
that's it, yeah. And your genetic blueprint just really helps you to cut through a lot of that and go, okay, now I can see why I experience things this way. Whereas, someone else in your family may not, or your friends may not. You're different, you're unique.
Right.
And so that can really help to identify those little quirks.
And where do you stand on supplementing with melatonin, for instance?
Yeah, well, it's certainly one of the options, but it comes back to your genes. So, if you're a slow metabolizer of melatonin, which also then makes you a slow metabolizer of caffeine, by the way, so they're linked. So, same pathway to metabolize them. So, if you're a slow metabolizer of melatonin and you take a slow release, which is what it typically is, then you can wake up groggy in the morning. And that doesn't feel so good either. And the doses, might be quite high compared, there's not this variation so much in doses of how much you take. So it's trial and error, and
Right.
knowing your blueprint as well, and going, oh yeah, I'm a slow metabolizer. So a slow release might make me groggy, but maybe you could take a much smaller dose and get some benefits. So it's trying to match the best amount for you. So and that's probably why the science is so variable around, does it work, doesn't it work? It comes down to the individual.
So I want to leave some time to talk about HRT, but before we get there, can we talk about like some supplements or some foods that might help with sleep if we want a kind of a natural approach to helping with that? I know like some people talk about Tart cherry that might help with sleep. Are there other things that might help?
So certainly, supplement-wise, melatonin is probably the leader in terms of supplements. And then it can just be these lifestyle pieces. So don't eat close to bed, because that's going to disrupt your circadian pattern. So try and get that 2 to 3 hours before going to sleep, keeping that regular bedtime so the rhythms get, you're getting into this rhythm and the body knows what to do. So Tart cherries have a bit of a melatonin in them. Whether it's enough to make a difference or not, it may do. And certainly, I think walnuts maybe, don't quote me on that one.
Yeah.
May also have a little bit of a melatonin in them as well. So it may not be enough for you, or it may just be a little bit of enough. But once again, we don't want to be turning on our digestive system going into bed.
Yeah, that's true. Very, very true.
Quite powerfully, it's lifestyle.
Right.
Don't eat close to bed. Be careful of what you watch. Keep your, try and get your heart rate down. Have those good
that relaxation.
Patterns. Exactly, those patterns of relaxation, and then. And just being aware too that you can really disrupt your circadian rhythms by what you do. And we didn't realize how impactful like a night of binge watching TV is, but it can take 3 days to recover your circadian rhythm. So now you've done something once, but that's
Right.
disrupted your rhythm for the next 3 days. And we know the statistics for shift workers are not great because of that disruption
Right.
to their circadian rhythm. And so there's a big risk, a significant risk that comes with doing shift work outside of your normal pattern of sleep, which includes high blood pressure, diabetes, gut disease, cancers, particularly breast cancer in women who do shift work. There's this increased risk, and
Right.
also weight gain and heart disease. So these, sleep is so critical, as we
It
mentioned
is.
earlier,
Yeah.
for all of these things. And
Yeah.
we think, well, okay, I may not be a shift worker, but
But a
you
lot of
might.
times what we're doing causes us to act like shift
Yes,
workers, right? Because we're
exactly.
not going with that circadian rhythm.
That's right. So
Right.
paying attention to the importance and giving sleep the priority it deserves to recover your body. So
Right.
yeah, if you stay up late watching TV or eat late, like within an hour of bed regularly, and if you get up extra early because you've got to go to a meeting or something
Right.
early in the morning, these if you do this more than once or twice a week, then it's the equivalent of being a shift worker
Wow.
in terms of the amount of disruption, because any of those can knock you out for, knock that rhythm out for 3 days. So yeah, paying attention to our environment.
All right. Well, we've got a couple minutes left, so I do want to talk about HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And there's, been a lot of research on it. And so what is your take on it for women? Obviously, they need to talk to their doctors and everything, but has there been misinformation about HRT?
Well, I think the number one point is that yes, HRT does have benefits to sleep, and that's now evidenced in the science. And I think we do need to find out the facts, and there is more research needed, of course, but that has been spearheaded by one of the most vocal advocates in this area, Dr. Louise Newson, and her websites are brilliant for understanding the facts, because there were some studies. There was a study done back in the 80s which was misreported, really, and that led to this incredible disruption in the use of
Right.
HRT. And so it's taken a long time to undo the damage of that, and then to get the evidence to show women that that HRT is not as big a risk factor as we thought for certain medical conditions. So it's certainly a conversation to have with your doctor, and I'm not that, but the Louise Newson has a wonderful website called Balance-Menopause, and there's so many fact sheets and so much information on there around, particularly around the use of HRT, hormone replacement therapy, but also around, excuse me, menopause, full stop, and different fact sheets about, different aspects of menopause. So yeah, so that also includes the Balance app, and on the Balance app, there's this really great tool where you can actually rate your menopause symptoms for where you are now, and it will give you a graph of that. And then you can repeat that over time and print that off as a PDF to take to your doctor and say, this is how, these symptoms are affecting me. I think this is menopause, number one, because we don't
Right.
always know, or perimenopause. But then what can I do about it?
That's great.
And being armed with the facts around that is really powerful for women, because we've heard how detrimental it can be.
Well, before we sign off, tell people again where they can find you, find all this information, Kim. Tell them about the offer you have with the course. We've got about 30 seconds to wrap this up, maybe less.
Yeah,
Let them know
sure.
where they can get a hold of you and what you're offering.
Yeah, so great. Well, we have got an offer for your listeners, Rachel, which we've never offered before, and it's 50% off our menopause library. So we developed 52 videos over the course of 12 months researching this, with fact sheets and toolkits to go with each aspect of what we were looking at. So things like caffeine and alcohol and other things we can do that impact menopause, our our HRT, our all of those lifestyle predominant things. And so that course can really help you to work out a little bit about what your genes are doing, and or what type of gene variant you may have in different aspects, and then how to negotiate that in menopause. So you can get details of that on our website. We've got that there for the next 2 weeks.
And that's at Koabella.com.
Yep, Koabella.com, and you will just navigate your way to the Genes, Menopause and Me library, and the offer will be there at a
until
50%
May
discount.
18th.
So May 18th. We've actually extended it to the end of the weekend, so
Okay.
the Sunday, which is the
Perfect.
which is the 21st.
21st.
So midnight on the 21st Pacific time.
All right, fantastic. Well, Kim, my goodness, we covered a lot of ground, but I feel like there was so much more. I feel like I need to have you back on the show, and I'm sure I will, to talk about this again. It's been so wonderful to have you here. You really have an extensive knowledge of this, and anybody who's listening that wants to know more about menopause, wants to understand how they can help themselves through their genetics and understanding lifestyle changes, reach out to Kim. You will thank yourself for it. Well, thanks everybody for listening to the Best Living Show. Tune in a couple weeks from now for another episode. Thanks for listening to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. Breathe, eat, sleep, thrive in every aspect of your life on TransformationTalkRadio.com. Tune in Thursdays at 6 p.m. to continue your new narrative and step into a new way of being. We are not what people have told us we are. We are so much more than that. I'm going to help you thrive and get the answers you desire, not only in the external world, but on the inside. For more information, go to drrachelsweet.com. That's drrachelsweet.com.